Welcome to Crime Maze. In this video we are going to talk about 5 stories of kids who killed their parents. Before starting this video, like this video and subscribe to Crime Maze channel for future updates. Parents love their children through thick and thin, but this love isn't always reciprocated, and the repercussions can be disastrous. Parents love their children through good times and bad, but this love isn't always returned. These are the children who murdered their parents in horrific acts of betrayal and greed. Number 5. Forbidden Lust. Sarah Marie Johnson, a 16-year-old girl from Bellevue, Idaho, was just like any other 16-year-old girl. The high school student admired her father Alan, 46, but fought with her mother Diane, 52, frequently. Despite this, both of her parents only wanted the best for their daughter. Sarah's relationship with Bruno Santos, 19, caused a wedge between her and her parents. Bruno had a history of drugs and violence, and when Diane and Alan learned of it, they advised her to end the relationship. She, on the other hand, disobeyed and spent the night at Bruno's. When Alan found out, he showed up at the front door and told Bruno to stay away from Sarah, or he'd report him to the cops for his shady past. He then returned home with his daughter and grounded her. Diane and Alan Johnson are a couple. Sarah, on the other hand, was fed up with her parents meddling, so, around 6 a.m. the next day, she opened her father's weapons case and took a rifle from it. Then, while her mother was sleeping and her father was washing, she slipped into her parents' room. She first took aim at her mother's head with the gun and pressed the trigger. Alan was startled by the shot and dashed out of the restroom in his bathrobe. He discovered his deceased wife in the bed, followed by Sarah, who was clutching a revolver. The crime scene was a bloodbath. He pleaded with her not to fire, but she shot her father in the chest, killing him. Sarah then went over to a neighbor's house, where she was distressed, and they dialed 911. Police discovered a bloody pink bathrobe and a latex glove with gunshot residue in a receptacle outside the house, which had Alan, Diane, and Sarah's DNA, implicating her in the crime. She was convicted guilty of murder and sentenced to 2 life terms in prison. Sarah in court, enraged by her parents' meddling. Number 4. Tough love. In New York City, the Gilbert family was known for their self-made financial prosperity. Thomas Gilbert Sr., 70, was the founder and CEO of a successful hedge firm. His daughter and wife Shelley lived with him, while his son Thomas Gilbert Jr. had his own apartment nearby. Thomas Jr., unlike his father, failed to keep a consistent career and had just a few achievements outside of surfing. Sr. Thomas Gilbert, despite taking medicine, he struggled from depression, anxiety, paranoia, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, and his parents wished for him to seek professional help. They agreed to reduce their son's allowance in order to compel him to get treatment for his mental illness. Instead of obeying, Thomas Jr. used Facebook to buy a pistol. Shelley believed it was a hint of good news when he showed up to his parents' place for a visit. Thomas Jr. requested that she leave him alone with his father so that they could talk business. She left the room. But when she put her ear to the door and heard nothing, she grew concerned. Her husband was lying on his back, his hand covering a gun on his chest, which had been placed there in a botched attempt at staging a suicide. Thomas Jr. was convicted of second-degree murder and unlawful possession of a firearm on 2 counts. Thomas Jr. resented being cut off from the family's resources. Number 3. Killer Game. Daniel Chapman, 22, told his parents he couldn't come to the table because he was in the middle of a computer game when supper was served in the Chapman household. Stephen, 56, a frustrated father, advised his son to hunt for a new place to rent the next day. He then stormed into the family's Sydney home office and disconnected the internet modem. Things took a tragic turn when Stephen, a furious father, instructed his son Daniel to stop playing his game. He then went into Daniel's room and attempted to unplug the computer's wires. Daniel, on the other hand, a medieval weapon collector, took a hunting knife from under his bed and stabbed his father in the back. He proceeded to meet his mother, Elaine, after removing the 14-centimeter blade. He told her coldly, "I stabbed him." Elaine attempted to contact an ambulance, but unintentionally dialed 999, the British emergency number from where she hails. A neighbor called to report the incident 10 minutes later. Stephen died from blood loss despite the arrival of 3 ambulances. Daniel Chapman admitted to manslaughter and was sentenced to at least 3 years in prison, citing his autistic spectrum diagnosis and a momentary loss in self-control. Number 2. Destructive debt. Martin Ruddy, 29, a swimming pool worker, was battling with a nearly $10,000 debt when his marriage began to break apart as a result. He sought assistance from his father, Eric, 64. Martin was close to his father, Martin, and his mother, Carol, 53, and was usually running errands for them. His mother, however, had been left incapacitated by a stroke. And his father, Eric, from Newcastle, UK, was devoting all of his funds to ensuring Carol's care if he ever died. As a result, when Martin's debt-ridden father asked for money to pay off his bills, he refused. Martin was enraged and smashed him with a brick. He then sliced Eric's face with a sharp knife to make it appear as if he'd been robbed. Despite being on antidepressants, Martin's mother, who was disabled, attempted to contact emergency services. Martin apprehended her and strangled her with a TV cord. He then used a brick and scissors to inflict injuries on himself to make it appear as if he, too, had been a victim of the attack. He staggered over to his next-door neighbor's house and reported they'd all been robbed. Andrea Hardy trailed him back to his residence, where they attempted to revive Eric and Carol. They were transported to a local hospital and pronounced dead. Martin was later convicted of murdering his parents and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Ruddy, Martin. Number 1. A web of lies. When police arrived at a home in Delmar, New York, they discovered court clerk Peter Porco, 52, dead from head injuries in a pool of his own blood. Joan, his wife, was laying next to their bed, suffering from a similar head injury. Her face was mutilated, one of her eyes was lost, and her head had caved in. She was still alive. Despite this, a bleeding axe was nearby. A detective asked Joan whether she could tell him about her assailant as paramedics placed her onto a trolley. He inquired, "Was it a family member?" She nodded. She shook her head when he asked if it was her oldest son Jonathan. He then inquired about her younger son Christopher, to which she replied with a nod. A bloodied axe stood next to a gravely injured Joan. Joan quickly fell into a coma, but her replies firmly established Christopher as the investigation's focal point. Officers began researching and learned he was studying at the University of Rochester, more than 350 kilometers away. Despite this, officers discovered a rift between the Porcos and their son, especially when it came to money. Christopher had outstanding debts from his new Jeep Wrangler, as well as his university fees. To cover his costs, he took out a loan and signed it with his father's signature. Peter questioned his son about the money 2 weeks before he was murdered, threatening to report him in an email. He'd remained a loving father, though. Was it a family member? Peter had stated. Christopher was convicted of 1 count of second-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder in the end. Joan awoke from her coma to find her spouse had died and her face had been severely deformed. Despite this, she maintained that Christopher had nothing to do with her husband's death and refused to name him. However, evidence revealed that Christopher returned home on the night of the murder, with a toll collector recalling his yellow Jeep passing by. He was convicted of 1 count of second-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder in the end. For each offense, he received a sentence of 50 years to life in prison. What do you think about this video? Do let us know down in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear from us again, be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go.